First contact fiasco. The Vanguard's bridge fell silent as the massive alien structure materialized on their view screen. Captain Alina Reyes leaned forward in her command chair, her expression a mixture of awe and professional caution. The exploration vessel had been mapping uncharted regions beyond the Arcturus Passage when they'd stumbled upon what appeared to be an enormous space station, easily 20 times the size of Earth's largest orbital habitat. Analysis, Commander Chen. Reyes asked, her voice steady despite the unprecedented discovery. Commander Shen Chen, the Vanguard's senior science officer, studied his console with practiced efficiency. Structure appears to be approximately 8 kilometers in diameter, Captain. I'm detecting massive energy signatures consistent with advanced reactor technology, multiple weapon emplacements, and they're powering up. Lieutenant Maya Okafor, the ship's tactical specialist, scoffed audibly as she reviewed the incoming data. Captain, permission to speak freely. Always, Lieutenant. Their defense systems are a joke. Okafor's fingers danced across her console, highlighting various segments of the alien structure. Look at these weapon configurations. They're using standard particle acceleration without phase correction. We abandoned that approach 30 years ago because of the catastrophic cascade failures during rapid-fire sequences. Before Captain Reyes could respond, the main view screen flickered, revealing a bipedal alien with iridescent scales and 4 arms. Its elongated head housed 6 eyes arranged in a hexagonal pattern, all focused intensely on the bridge crew. "Attention unauthorized vessel," the alien intoned, its voice processed through the Vanguard's translation matrix. "You have entered the sovereign territory of the Xorian hegemony, rulers of 3,000 star systems and conquerors of the 7 spiral arms. Power down your systems immediately and prepare to be boarded." Captain Reyes raised an eyebrow. "This is Captain Alina Reyes of the Earth exploration vessel Vanguard. We are on a peaceful mission of discovery and mean no harm." However, she added with a slight smile, "We will not be powering down or submitting to any boarding actions." The alien's scales rippled in what the crew assumed was indignation. "Perhaps you misunderstand your situation. I am Grand Marshal Vexkar of the Xorian Ninth Fleet. This station alone commands enough firepower to reduce your primitive vessel to its component atoms." Lieutenant Okafor couldn't contain herself. A laugh escaped her lips before she quickly composed herself. "Sorry, Captain." Vexkar's eyes narrowed. "You find your imminent destruction amusing, human." Captain Reyes gestured casually toward Okafor. "My tactical specialist was just noticing some interesting choices in your defensive architecture." "Lieutenant, please explain to the Grand Marshal." Okafor straightened. "Your weapon systems are critically vulnerable to targeted electromagnetic pulses at the resonance frequency of your crystalline computing nodes. One well-placed disruptor torpedo could cascade through your entire network, leaving your impressive station defenseless." Commander Chen added, "Not to mention the unshielded coolant conduits running along your primary reactor housing. A single breach there would trigger an uncontrolled reaction." Vexkar's posture stiffened. "Impossible. Our designs have been perfected over millennia off." "Of stagnation," Reyes interrupted. "Innovation requires challenge, Grand Marshal. Humanity spent centuries trying to annihilate itself before we grew up. We learned efficiency the hard way." The bridge fell silent as Vexkar conversed with unseen advisors off-screen. Captain Reyes used the opportunity to quietly order a tactical assessment of the entire station. When the alien commander returned his attention to them, his demeanor had shifted subtly. "Our sensors detect unusual technological configurations in your vessel. Technologies unknown to our scientists." There was a new note in Vexkar's voice. Curiosity, perhaps even concern. "We've had to be creative," Reyes replied simply. "When resources are limited, you learn to do more with less." Before the conversation could continue, alarms blared across both the Vanguard and the Xorian station. Commander Chen's console lit up with urgent readings. "Captain, massive spatial distortion forming 3,000 kilometers off our starboard bow. Energy signature unlike anything in our database. The view screen split to show a swirling vortex of dark energy materializing in the void. From its depths emerged a vessel of unmistakably alien design, a black chitinous structure that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. One successful engagement is more than our fleet has managed in 50 cycles. Vexcar cut them off sharply. Archon Zilvex's scales shifted to a deep purple that the humans now recognized as their contemplative state. Very well. We will form a joint tactical group. The cruiser Immutable Doctrine will accompany the Vanguard to the Phenax's last known coordinates. Captain Rice inclined her head respectfully. Thank you, Archon. I believe our cooperation will benefit both our peoples. As the meeting concluded and the humans prepared to return to their ship, Lieutenant Okafor fell into step beside Captain Reyes. Permission to speak freely, Captain. Always. They're hiding something about these Phenax. Their defensive posture, the way they deflect certain questions. Something doesn't add up. Reyes nodded slightly. I had the same feeling. Keep your eyes open, Lieutenant. First contact situations are rarely straightforward, and I suspect this one is more complicated than most. 20 hours later, the Vanguard and the massively larger Xorian warship Immutable Doctrine dropped out of faster-than-light travel near the remains of what had once been a thriving Xorian colony world. The planet below was now a barren gray husk, its oceans evaporated, its atmosphere stripped away. Sensors show molecular destabilization consistent with the weapon we observed, Commander Chen reported grimly. They didn't just destroy this world, they consumed it. On the split view screen, Grand Marshal Vexcar commanded from the Doctrine's bridge. This was Soria Prime, our first colony beyond our homeworld. Population of 8 billion before the Phenax came. His voice held genuine grief that transcended species barriers. I'm sorry for your loss, Rice said sincerely. No one should experience this kind of destruction. Their somber moment was interrupted by Lieutenant Okafor. Captain, I'm detecting unusual energy readings at the edge of the system. Similar signature to the Phenax rift, but different somehow. Different how? Less chaotic. More deliberate. Grand Marshal Vexcar's scales paled. They're coming. All stations. Battle readiness, Reyes ordered calmly. Commander Chen, activate the neural quantum interface. Lieutenant Okafor, prepare defensive countermeasures based on our previous encounter. The Vanguard systems hummed as they reconfigured to the heightened alert status. Unlike the rigid protocol-driven preparations visible on the Xorian vessel, the human ship's response was fluid, with crew members adapting their stations in real time as data flowed through both conventional and neural pathways. When the spatial rift opened, it wasn't a single Phenax warship that emerged, but 3, each larger and more ominous than the one they'd encountered previously. They've adapted, Okafor reported tensely. Energy signatures are modulating. They're specifically countering the disruption frequency we used before. On the view screen, Vexcar barked orders to his crew. The Immutable Doctrine's weapon systems powered up, impressive arrays of particle cannons and energy projectors that dwarfed the Vanguard's armaments. Marshal, Reyes called urgently, don't engage directly. Their adaptation suggests they've analyzed your weapon systems thoroughly. We will not retreat again, Vexcar declared. The Doctrine carries the latest defensive upgrades from our finest engineers. Before Reyes could argue further, the Xorian warship surged forward, unleashing a barrage of energy weapons against the lead Phenax vessel. For a moment, it seemed effective. The alien ship's hull rippled under the assault. Then the Phenax adapted. Their hulls began absorbing the energy from the Xorian weapons, growing stronger with each blast. They're feeding on the attacks, Commander Chen reported in horror. The energy is being converted and stored somehow. The Phenax counterattack was devastating. Green disintegration beams lanced out, slicing through the Immutable Doctrine's supposedly impenetrable shields like they weren't there. Massive sections of the Xorian warship simply vanished, converted to energy that the Phenax vessels eagerly absorbed. "Get us in there," Rais ordered. "But no energy weapons. Okafor, what else do we have?" The tactical officer's hands flew across her console, neural interface, enhancing her natural creativity. Kinetic penetrators could work. Physical mass rather than energy. And her eyes lit up. The gravimetric distortion generator. The experimental system. It's never been field-tested. No time like the present, Captain. Rais nodded. "Do it." The Vanguard accelerated toward the battle, maneuvering with an agility that belied its size. As they approached, the smallest Phoenix vessel broke off to intercept them. "Gravimetric distortion generator online," Okafor reported. "Targeting Phoenix vessel. Unconventional alliance." 3 days after the encounter with the Phoenix warship, Captain Alina Rais found herself in what the Xorians called the Chamber of Celestial Discourse, essentially their version of a conference room, though far more ostentatious than anything on the Vanguard. The circular chamber's walls displayed real-time stellar cartography, with the 3,000 systems of the Xorian hegemony highlighted in pulsing gold. Across the polished obsidian table sat not only Grand Marshal Vexkar, but also Supreme Archon Zilvex, the highest military authority in the hegemony. The Archon scales bore elaborate patterns indicating their elevated status, and their 12 attendants maintained a respectful distance. "Your analysis of our defensive vulnerabilities was uncomfortably accurate," Archon Zilvex admitted, their voice carrying the distinctive harmonic overtones of the Xorian elite. "Our engineers have spent centuries refining these systems. How did your tactical officer identify their weaknesses so quickly?" Captain Rais glanced at Lieutenant Okafor, who sat beside her along with Commander Chen. "Lieutenant?" Okafor leaned forward. "With respect, Archon, it's because we've made similar mistakes ourselves. Earth's history is filled with technological dead ends and catastrophic failures. We learned by doing and by failing." "The hegemony does not fail," one of the attendants hissed, only to be silenced by a sharp gesture from Zilvex. "Clearly, we have," the Archon countered. "The Phoenix have breached our defenses 12 times in the past solar cycle, each attack more devastating than the last." Commander Chen studied the stellar map with interest. "These Phoenix, what do we know about them?" Vexkar activated a holographic display showing the unsettling black vessel they'd encountered. "They appeared at the edges of our territory 50 cycles ago. They consume everything. Planets, ships, even energy itself. They leave nothing but empty husks. We've lost 17 colony worlds despite our best defensive efforts. And you've never attempted to communicate with them?" Rais asked. The Xorians exchanged glances that the humans interpreted as somewhere between surprise and horror. "Communicate? They are devourers, Captain. There is nothing to discuss." Rais wasn't convinced. Every sentient species has motivations, needs, even predators. "Perhaps on Earth," Zilvex replied dismissively. "The galaxy is far more dangerous than your limited experience suggests." Before Rais could respond, the chamber's doors parted to admit a new Xorian, smaller than the others, with scales that shifted rapidly between colors in a way the translation matrix couldn't interpret as emotional states. "Forgive the interruption, Archon," the newcomer said, bowing deeply. "The analysis of the human vessel is complete." Zilvex gestured for them to continue. "Their ship contains technologies both primitive and inexplicably advanced. Their propulsion system uses conventional fusion principles, yet achieves efficiency ratings that violate our understood laws of thermodynamics. Their computing systems are a hybrid of quantum, biological, and what appears to be cognitive resonance matrices." Commander Chen nodded. "Neural quantum interfacing. It allows our systems to adapt to new threats in real time by incorporating human intuition directly into the decision loop." The Xorian scientist's scales flickered rapidly. "Impossible. Organic minds cannot interface directly with quantum systems without significant biological modification." "Yes, that was the conventional wisdom on Earth too," until Dr. Amara Osai proved otherwise. Chen explained. Sometimes the greatest scientific breakthroughs come from ignoring what everyone knows to be impossible. Captain Reyes steered the conversation back to the immediate concern. The Phoenix threat is growing, and it seems they're as much a danger to us as they are to you. I propose a joint operation. Zorian knowledge of their attack patterns combined with human adaptability. Archon Zilvex studied her carefully. Why would you risk your single vessel against an enemy you only learned of days ago? Because that's what explorers do, Reyes replied. We seek knowledge and build bridges between civilizations. And sometimes, she added with a slight smile, we get to show off a bit in the process. The chamber erupted in Saurian vocalizations that the translation matrix struggled to interpret, somewhere between laughter and outrage. Finally, Vexkar raised a hand for silence. The human captain makes a valid proposal, Archon. Their technology, while strange, proved effective against the Phoenix weapon systems. One engagement is hardly, began one of the attendants. Phoenix warship. Vexkar hissed, genuine fear evident in his voice. They found us. Friends of yours? Reyes asked dryly. The Phoenix are devourers. They consume all in their path, organic, mechanical, even energy itself. They are death incarnate. As if to emphasize his point, the Phoenix vessel fired a sickly green beam toward the Xorian station. Where it struck, matter simply ceased to exist, leaving a perfect cylindrical hole through multiple decks. Impressive, Lieutenant Okafor muttered, already analyzing the weapon's properties. Some kind of molecular disintegration beam. Captain, Commander Chen interjected, the Xorian station's shields are failing. Their defensive algorithms can't adapt fast enough to the Phoenix attack pattern. Reyes considered their options quickly. First contact with not one but two alien civilizations in a single day, one arrogant, but apparently not immediately hostile, the other clearly dangerous. Starfleet protocols were clear about non-interference, but they were also clear about defending innocent life when possible. Lieutenant Okafor, can we neutralize that Phoenix weapon? Okafor's fingers flew across her tactical display. Their beam technology is advanced, but the focusing mechanism has a distinct emission signature. I can calibrate our phase disruptors to interfere with it, but we'd need to get closer. Helm, bring us about. Put us between that warship and the station. The bridge crew exchanged glances, but moved to execute her orders without hesitation. Captain, Commander Chen said quietly, may I remind you of General Order 4? Non-interference in. I'm familiar with the regulations, Commander, Reyes cut him off. But I'm not about to sit back and watch a massacre, no matter how annoying our new friends might be. On the view screen, Vexkar's expression shifted from fear to confusion. You're positioning to defend our station. Why would you risk yourselves? Because that's what humans do, Reyes replied simply. Lieutenant Okafor, ready defensive measures. Let's show the Xorians and these Phoenix what humanity can do when pushed. The Vanguard surged forward, its engines glowing bright as it placed itself directly in the Phoenix vessel's path. The alien warship paused, seemingly confused by the smaller ship's behavior. They're scanning us, Chen reported. Extensive sensor suites. Let them look, Reyes said. Okafor, target their weapon emplacements and prepare to fire on my mark. Ready, Captain. The Phoenix vessel shifted, reorienting its primary weapon toward the Vanguard. They're powering up for another shot, Chen warned. Now, Lieutenant. The Vanguard fired first, not with conventional weapons, but with a focused burst of precisely modulated energy that struck the Phoenix vessel's main emitter. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The disintegration beam backfired, creating a cascading failure that rippled through the alien ship's systems. Direct hit, Okafor reported. Their weapon system is offline. The Phoenix vessel reeled, its hull crackling with feedback energy. After a moment of apparent indecision, it turned and retreated back into the spatial rift, which collapsed behind it. On the view screen, Grand Marshal Vexkar stared at the humans with all six eyes wide. You repelled a Phenax warship. No species has ever. We got lucky, Rice said modestly, though her pride in her crew was evident. Their technology isn't invincible, just different. Perhaps, Vexkar admitted, the Xorian hegemony has something to learn from humans after all. Commander Chen leaned toward Captain Reyes. Captain, this could be an unprecedented opportunity for cultural and technological exchange. Reyes nodded. Grand Marshal, now that the immediate crisis has passed, perhaps we should discuss a more formal introduction between our peoples. It seems we might have things to offer each other. Vexkar's scales shifted through several colors before settling on a deep blue. Indeed, Captain Reyes, the Xorian High Council will want to meet these humans who laugh at our weapons yet risk themselves for our safety. Perhaps your species is more complex than we initially assumed. You have no idea, Reyes replied with a smile. Humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology, Marshal Vexkar. It's our adaptability and our stubborn refusal to accept limitations. As arrangements were made for a delegation to board the Xorian station, Lieutenant Okafor approached the captain privately. Do you think they realize we were bluffing about how easily we could disable their systems? Reyes shrugged. Sometimes perception is more important than reality, Lieutenant. Besides, she added with a wink, were we entirely bluffing? Okafor's confident smile was answer enough. Fire. The weapon didn't produce a visible beam or explosion. Instead, space itself seemed to warp around the Phenax ship, compressing and expanding in unnatural patterns. The alien vessel shuddered, its hull buckling under forces it couldn't absorb or adapt to. It's working, Chen exclaimed. Their hull integrity is failing. The Phenax vessel attempted to retreat, but the gravimetric distortions followed it, increasing in intensity until finally, with a silent flash, the ship imploded, crushed by the fabric of space-time itself. On the view screen, Vexkar's bridge was in chaos, emergency systems flashing as his crew fought to keep their crippled vessel intact. How did you? He began, before a fresh assault from the remaining Phenax ships cut the transmission. Get us between those ships and the Doctrine, Reyes ordered. Prepare 2 more gravimetric bursts. As the Vanguard moved to protect the Xorian vessel, Commander Chen made a startling discovery. Captain, I'm detecting unusual radiation from the debris of the destroyed Phenax ship. It's organic in nature. Organic? You mean? There were living beings aboard, yes, and the radiation pattern suggests significant genetic manipulation. These aren't just ships, Captain. They're biomechanical constructs, part machine, part living organism. This revelation changed everything, but there was no time to process it fully as the Vanguard engaged the remaining Phenax vessels. The gravimetric weapon proved effective again, crippling one ship and forcing the other to retreat back through a hastily generated rift. In the battle's aftermath, as emergency teams from the Vanguard boarded the immutable Doctrine to assist with critical repairs, Captain Reyes confronted Grand Marshal Vexkar in what remained of his command center. You knew, she accused quietly. You knew the Phenax were living beings, not just mindless devourers. Vexkar's scales shifted to a dull gray. What difference does it make? They still consume everything in their path. It makes all the difference, Reyes insisted. Living beings have motivations, needs, potentially even the capacity for communication and negotiation. There can be no negotiation with the Phenax. How do you know? Have you ever tried? Vexkar's silence was answer enough. Evolution through adversity. The revelation that the Phenax were biomechanical organisms rather than purely mechanical constructs transformed the nature of the conflict. In the 2 weeks following the battle at Xoria Prime, the Vanguard science team worked feverishly alongside Xorian researchers in a hastily established joint laboratory aboard their damaged but still functional station. Captain Reyes stood before a holographic display of the Phenax debris they'd recovered, turning slowly as she absorbed the implications of what they'd discovered. Commander Chen guided her through their findings. "They're essentially living ships," he explained. "Genetically engineered organisms with integrated mechanical components. The biological systems handle adaptation and energy processing, while the mechanical elements provide structure and weapon functionality. Sophisticated bioengineering," Rice mused, "far beyond anything humanity has achieved." "Yes and no," Chen countered. "Their biological components are indeed advanced, but strangely specialized. They appear designed for a single purpose: consumption and conversion of energy and matter." From the other side of the laboratory, a Xorian scientist named Tezik approached, their scales rippling with excitement. Unlike many of their kind, Tezik had embraced collaboration with the humans with genuine enthusiasm. "Captain Rice, we've made a breakthrough in decoding the neural patterns in the Phenax biological components," they announced. "It appears to be a form of distributed consciousness, no central brain, but a network of specialized neural clusters throughout the organism." "Like a jellyfish or octopus on Earth," Chen suggested. "Somewhat, yes," Tezik agreed, "but more sophisticated. And we've detected communication signals between these neural clusters that match patterns we've recorded during Phenax attacks." Lieutenant Okafor, who had been analyzing the Phenax weapon systems at a nearby workstation, looked up sharply. "You've been recording their communications. For how long?" Tezik's scales flickered in what the humans now recognized as embarrassment. "The hegemony has been monitoring Phenax communications for nearly 40 cycles. We've never been able to decode them." "And you didn't think to mention this earlier?" Rise asked, keeping her tone measured despite her frustration. Supreme Archon Zilvex considered it irrelevant. "The Phenax are devourers. What they say to each other matters not." Rise exchanged glances with her officers. The Xorian's rigid thinking continued to hamper progress, but this was no time for recriminations. "Commander Chen, work with Tezik to analyze those communication patterns. If they're communicating, they're coordinating, which means they have social structures, possibly even a civilization of sorts." "A civilization of parasites," came Grand Marshal Vexkar's voice as he entered the laboratory. "They exist only to consume." "With respect, Marshal," Rice countered, "that's an assumption, one that might be preventing us from finding a real solution." Before Vexkar could respond, alarms blared throughout the station. "Multiple spatial rifts forming," announced a Xorian officer over the comm system. "Phenax fleet approaching. At least 12 vessels detected." "They've never attacked in such numbers," Vexkar said, his scales paling. "They must have detected our research into their biology. Or they're responding to the destruction of their ships," Rice suggested. "Either way, we need to evacuate this station immediately." Vexkar bristled. "Xorians do not abandon their posts. Then they die unnecessarily," Rice snapped, her patience wearing thin. "Marshal, that station at Xoria Prime was more heavily armed than this one, and the Phenax cut through it like paper. We need to fall back and regroup." For a tense moment, Vexkar seemed ready to reject her advice out of sheer pride. Then, remarkably, his posture shifted. "Perhaps. Adaptation has its merits. I will order non-essential personnel to evacuate." As chaos erupted around them with evacuation orders and battle preparations, Commander Chen pulled Captain Rice aside urgently. "Captain, I've been analyzing the communication data Tezik provided. There's something strange about the patterns." "Define strange." "They're familiar somehow. The base syntax has similarities to mathematical sequences we've observed in certain Earth species." "Which species?" Chen's expression was troubled. "Colonial insects, specifically those responding to environmental threats." Rice processed this information quickly. "You're saying the Phenax might be responding to some kind of threat. Not just hunting, but what? Defending themselves?" "It's just a theory, but the communication intensity spikes dramatically whenever they encounter Xorian technology, almost like an immune response." Their discussion was interrupted as the station shuddered under the first Phenax attack. View screens throughout the laboratory showed the approaching fleet, each ship larger and more ominous than those they'd encountered previously. "We're out of time," Rice decided. "Get all our research data and specimens to the Vanguard." Lieutenant Okafor prepped the gravimetric system for multiple targets. "The system wasn't designed for that kind of output, Captain," Okafor warned. "We could overload the emitters. Then we'll overload them. One shot per ship if necessary." As they rushed to evacuate, Grand Marshal Vexkar approached Reyes again. "Your vessel cannot stand against 12 Phonax ships, Captain, even with your gravimetric weapon. We're open to alternatives, Marshal." Vexkar hesitated, then made a decision. "There is one option. The hegemony possesses a weapon of last resort, a stellar disruptor capable of inducing premature nova in a star. We've never deployed it because the collateral damage would be extensive." Reyes stared at him incredulously. "You're suggesting we blow up a star, potentially killing billions if there are inhabited worlds in this system?" "This system was evacuated after the first Phonax incursion," Vexkar clarified. "And yes, I am suggesting exactly that. The energy release would destroy the Phonax fleet instantly, along with this station, everyone on it, and potentially causing catastrophic damage to nearby systems." Rice countered. "There has to be another way." Commander Chen, who had been listening intently, suddenly straightened. "Captain, what if we try to communicate with them?" Both Rice and Vexkar turned to him in surprise. "The patterns I identified," Chen explained rapidly. "If they are communication signals, and if they do have similarities to Earth insect colonies, then they might respond to certain stimuli. Colonial species often have built-in responses to specific pheromones or signals that identify members of their own kind. You're suggesting we what? Try to convince the Phonax we're friends?" Vexkar's disbelief was evident. "Not friends," Chen corrected, "but perhaps not enemies either. At least not enemies they need to eliminate immediately." Reyes considered the idea. It was a long shot, but certainly preferable to Vexkar's stellar nova option. How quickly can you synthesize a communication signal based on these patterns? With Tezik's help and access to the Xorian communication array, 20 minutes, maybe less. Another impact rocked the station. "You have 10, Reyes decided. "Marshal, we need to buy them time." Surprisingly, Vexkar nodded without argument. "The station's remaining weapons are at your disposal, Captain. I will coordinate with your tactical officer." As Chen and Tezik raced to develop their communication signal, Reyes and Vexkar joined Lieutenant Okafor at the tactical station. The Phonax fleet had surrounded the station and was methodically disintegrating its outer defenses. "Their attack pattern is different this time," Okafor noted. "More precise. They're targeting communication arrays and sensor nodes first. They're learning," Reyes realized, "adapting their tactics based on previous encounters." "Intelligent predators," Vexkar acknowledged grimly. "All the more reason to destroy them completely. Or all the more reason to try understanding them," Reyes countered. "Intelligence means potential for communication." 10 minutes later, as the station's outer hull began to fail under the relentless Phonax assault, Commander Chen and Tezik returned to the command center. "We've synthesized a signal based on the Phonax communication patterns," Chen reported breathlessly. "It's our best approximation of their equivalent of a non-aggression marker. In colonial insect terms, essentially, we are not a threat to the hive." Tezik added, their scales shifting rapidly with nervous energy. "Can we broadcast it?" Reyes asked. "Through the station's main communication array, yes," Chen confirmed. "But we'll need to drop shields briefly to get a clean transmission." Vexkar's scales darkened. "Drop shields. They'll cut us in half before your signal reaches them." "Not if we give them something else to focus on," Reyes decided. Lieutenant Okafor prepared to fire the gravimetric weapon at the largest Phonax vessel. Minimal power, just enough to get their attention. "Marshal, have your gunners target the same ship with conventional weapons immediately afterward." A distraction, Vexcar realized. While they adapt to our attack, we send the signal, Rais confirmed. Everyone clear on the plan. We'll have seconds at most. With tense nods all around, they moved to their positions. The coordinated attack was executed with precision, the Vanguard's gravimetric pulse causing the lead Phoenix vessel to shudder, followed immediately by a barrage from the station's remaining weapons. As expected, the Phoenix ships focused their attention on these new threats. Shields down. Broadcasting now, Chen announced. For 3 agonizing seconds, the station was completely vulnerable as the synthesized signal pulsed outward. Rais held her breath, fully expecting to feel the disintegration beams cutting through the command center at any moment. Instead, something unexpected happened. The Phoenix attack stopped. All 12 ships simply paused. They've ceased fire, Okafor reported in disbelief. Energy readings are fluctuating. On the view screens, the Phoenix vessels hung motionless, their dark hulls seeming to ripple slightly. They're communicating with each other, Chen said, monitoring the sensor readings. Massive increase in the signal patterns we identified. Did it work? Vexcar asked cautiously. Are they recognizing us as non-threats? Before anyone could answer, the Phoenix vessels began to move again, but not to resume their attack. Instead, they were reconfiguring, their hulls shifting and flowing into new formations. What are they doing? Rais wondered aloud. The answer came moments later as one of the Phoenix ships extended what appeared to be a communication appendage, a structure that hadn't been visible before. There, responding to our signal, Chen said in amazement, attempting to establish communication on their terms. Tezek's scales had turned a bright, vivid blue that none of the humans had seen before. In 50 cycles of conflict, they have never done this, never attempted communication of any kind. Because you never tried to speak their language, Rais pointed out. You only attacked. For the first time, Grand Marshal Vexcar